The transport bay reeked of burnt plasma and desperation. Krell pressed his dorsal ridge against the cold metal wall, watching the human reload his weapon with movement so casual he might have been preparing breakfast. 3 of Krell's squad mates lay scattered across the deck plating, their ichor still pooling beneath emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. "I told you," Krell clicked through his translator, mandibles clicking rapid warnings. "Shoot all you want. It will not die." The human, Marcus Webb, glanced up from his magazine. One eyebrow raised in what Krell had learned was their species' equivalent of mild curiosity mixed with amusement. "You talking about that thing in the cargo hold?" "Obviously." Krell's secondary arms gestured toward the sealed bulkhead, where something massive was currently testing the structural integrity of their reinforced containment unit. The entire ship shuddered with each impact. We transported specimens across 17 star systems. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever survived sustained pulse fire like this creature. Marcus slapped the magazine into his rifle with a metallic click that somehow sounded more threatening than the creature's roars. "Neat. What is it?" "A Varathian shock beast, native to the heavy gravity moons of the Kelmar Expanse." Krell's translator struggled to convey the appropriate level of terror he felt. They evolve in environments where atmospheric pressure could crush most sentient species into paste. Their hide is layered chitin over crystallized bone structures, backed by regenerative tissue that can heal faster than most weapons can damage it. "Uh-huh." Marcus checked his tactical display with infuriating calm. "And it got loose because—" Krell's clicking intensified, which his translator rendered as a long, suffering sigh. "Because someone, specifically Junior Transport Technician Vlix, decided to run a full system diagnostic during a warp transition. The magnetic locks failed for 0.7 seconds. Apparently, that was sufficient." Another impact rocked the ship. Somewhere in the aft sections, klaxons wailed their mechanical panic into the recycled air. The containment door, rated to withstand small arms fire and designed by the finest engineers in the Galactic Commerce Guild, began to show stress fractures along its edges. "So, your plan is what exactly?" Marcus asked, moving toward the door with steps that seemed too relaxed for someone approaching certain death. "Wait for it to break through and hope it gets tired of eating you guys?" "We called for reinforcements," Krell protested, though even he could hear the weakness in his own voice. "The battlecruiser Infinite Justice will arrive in approximately 4 hours. We simply need to survive until then. The shock beast will eventually exhaust itself. They have fast metabolisms." 4 hours. Marcus nodded slowly, like he was considering a lunch menu rather than their survival timeline. "And how long do you figure that door has left?" As if answering his question, the bulkhead groaned. Metal shrieked. Something that sounded disturbingly like laughter echoed from the cargo hold, except laughter implied intelligence and joy, and this was neither. This was the sound of hunger that had gone beyond simple appetite, into territory that most species reserved for religious experiences or complete psychological breaks. "Perhaps 12 minutes, Krell admitted. "Maybe less." "Right." Marcus checked his remaining ammunition with practiced efficiency. Krell counted 4 magazines plus whatever was currently loaded. Standard Alliance military rounds, nothing fancy. The kind of thing you'd use for suppressing fire or dealing with unarmored targets. Completely inadequate for what was coming. "You misunderstand me," Krell said, trying one more time to make this stubborn human grasp the situation. "Our weapons could not harm it. Your weapon is based on similar principles, just more primitive. Chemical propellant instead of plasma induction, but the fundamental concept remains the same. You are throwing metal at a creature that evolved to ignore such attacks. The kinetic force is meaningless to it." Marcus smiled. Not the friendly kind of smile Krell had seen humans use during trade negotiations or social bonding. This was something else entirely. Something that made Krell's survival instincts scream warnings his conscious mind hadn't quite caught up to yet. "See, that's where you're making an assumption," Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular tone humans used right before they did something incredibly stupid or incredibly brilliant. In Krell's experience, the line between those two categories was uncomfortably thin. "You're thinking about this like an engineer. Energy transfer, force vectors, penetration coefficients." "Because that is how weapons function," Krell protested. "Sure, if you're fighting armor or trying to breach shields, but this isn't a tank. It's a biological organism." Marcus moved to the side of the door, positioning himself where he'd have a clear angle when it opened. "Doesn't matter how tough your hide is if I can make your insides stop working." The bulkhead buckled. Not failed, not yet. But the writing was being carved into the metal in real time. Krell could see the outline of what had to be claws, each one easily as long as his forearm. The shock beast's internal organs are protected by the same adaptive structure as its exterior, Krell said, though he was backing away as he spoke. "You are welcome to try. I will be in the secondary airlock." "You might want to stay," Marcus suggested, though it didn't sound like a suggestion so much as someone pointing out that you were about to miss something interesting. "Could use someone to confirm the kill for your insurance paperwork or whatever." "I will observe from a safe distance." Krell moved toward the airlock controls, then paused. "Why are you not afraid? Your heart rate has not elevated. Your scent has not changed to reflect stress hormones. You are looking at certain death with the same expression you used when selecting your meal rations this morning." Marcus shrugged, a gesture Krell had learned meant anything from "I don't know" to "I don't care" to "I'm about to do something you'll probably want to document." "This isn't my first shock beast." "Well, we call them different things depending on where you find them. Grizzlies, Cape buffalo, saltwater crocs. Point is, big and mean isn't new, just bigger and meaner than usual." The door exploded inward. Not slowly. Not with dramatic buildup. One moment, there was a damaged but intact bulkhead. The next moment, there was twisted metal, and something that barely fit through the opening it had created. Krell's brain struggled to process the creature in real time, kept trying to parse it into components that made evolutionary sense. There was mass, easily 3 tons of muscle and rage, wrapped in hide that looked like someone had crossbred stone with midnight. There were limbs, 6 of them, each ending in claws that had just torn through reinforced starship hull like it was decorative fabric. There was a head, if you could call it that, mostly mouth from what Krell could see, filled with teeth that seemed to have been designed by a committee that had never encountered the concept of overkill and decided to invent it from first principles. And there were eyes, multiple sets, all of them focusing on Marcus with the kind of attention usually reserved for prey, that had made the fatal mistake of looking delicious. The shock beast roared. The sound hit like a physical force, making Krell's internal organs vibrate in ways they were definitely not designed for. His translator tried to render it into something meaningful and gave up, just producing a string of error codes. Marcus raised his rifle. The shock beast charged. 3 tons of evolutionary success story, accelerating faster than anything that size had any right to move. Krell had seen them move before, in controlled environments and training simulations. Seeing one in an enclosed space was like watching a moon decide to go somewhere in a hurry. Marcus fired. Not a spray. Not panic shooting. 3 rounds, precisely placed. Center mass. The shock beast didn't even slow down. Its regenerative tissue was probably already sealing the wounds before they'd finished forming. Krell had seen this before. You could shoot these things until your ammunition ran out, and they'd just keep coming, healing faster than you could damage them. Marcus took 2 steps to his left, fluid as water. Not running, but repositioning. The shock beast adjusted its trajectory, claws gouging trenches in the deck plating as it turned. The smell of ozone and overheated metal filled the air, mixing with something organic and furious. He fired again, 4 rounds this time, walking them up from abdomen to chest cavity. The shock beast roared again, but it was a different sound now. Less triumph, more anger. Still coming, though, close enough that Krell could see the individual scales on its hide, each one looking like it had been carved from obsidian by a jeweler who specialized in nightmares. Marcus moved again, faster this time, diving under a swipe that would have separated his torso from his legs if it had connected. He rolled, came up shooting, put 6 rounds into the creature's side before it could recover. Krell noticed that the human wasn't aiming randomly. Each shot was placed with surgical precision, tracking some pattern Krell couldn't quite identify. The shock beast stumbled. Just for a second, less than a full step. But it stumbled. Its regenerative systems were working overtime now. Krell could see the tissue knitting itself together in real time. But there was a lag. Marcus had found it. Hydraulic shock, Marcus said conversationally, backing toward a support pillar while maintaining his sight picture. See? Your shock beast probably has something like a closed circulatory system, right? Heart? Or hearts pumping fluid through vessels to feed those big muscles? Krell just stared. The shock beast was between him and Marcus now, trying to decide which target to prioritize. It chose Marcus, probably because he'd just put another 3 rounds into its flank. Thing about hydraulic systems, Marcus continued, dodging another charge with economical efficiency, is they're really good at distributing force. Blood pressure keeps everything running smooth. But it also means damage in one area affects the whole system. And if I can spike that pressure hard enough, fast enough, in enough places... He emptied the rest of his magazine into the creature's neck and shoulder area. Rapid fire now, each impact creating a percussion symphony that Krell felt in his bones. The shock beast roared, but this time there was something else in the sound. Confusion. Pain, yes, but more than that. Its regenerative system was trying to prioritize repairs, couldn't quite keep up with the rate of new damage, and the hydraulic shock from each impact was rippling through its entire system. Marcus dropped the empty magazine, loaded a fresh one without looking, muscle memory taking over. "Your engineers were thinking about the armor," he said, circling now, keeping the pillar between himself and the creature. "About penetrating the hide. Nobody thought about just turning its own circulatory system into a weapon." The shock beast charged again, but it was slower now. Its movements had lost that impossible fluidity, becoming jerky and uncoordinated. Marcus didn't dodge this time. He stood his ground, aimed, and fired. Single shots now, taking his time. Each one placed exactly where he wanted it. Neck, chest, shoulder joints, anywhere major vessels would run close to the surface. The creature made it within 3 meters before its legs stopped cooperating. It crashed to the deck with an impact that Krell felt through his feet, sliding forward on momentum, claws still reaching for Marcus, even as its eyes began to glaze. Marcus fired twice more into its skull, professional courtesy more than necessity. The shock beast twitched, shuddered, and became extremely dead in a spreading pool of its own hydraulic fluid. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the roaring had been. Krell realized he'd been holding his breath and forced himself to inhale. The air tasted like burnt chemicals and organic decay. His translator was making small, unhappy sounds, trying to find words for what he'd just witnessed. Marcus walked over to the corpse, nudged it with his boot to confirm it wasn't playing dead, then looked up at Krell. "So, about that insurance paperwork. You want to come down here and get a closer look, or Should I just take some pictures? Krell descended from the airlock slowly, like he was approaching a religious icon that might decide to smite him for insufficient reverence. The shock beast was definitely dead. Its eyes had already begun to cloud, the regenerative tissue finally giving up the fight against basic entropy. "You killed it," Krell said, because someone needed to state the obvious, and his brain was still trying to process the implications. With a ballistic weapon. A primitive, chemically propelled projectile launcher. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds unimpressive. Marcus began field stripping his rifle, checking for damage like he hadn't just rewritten several chapters of xenobiology textbooks. Look, your plasma weapons probably hit harder per shot. More energy transfer, cleaner wounds. But they're also clean wounds. Neat holes that the regenerative tissue can prioritize. I'm putting dozens of smaller wounds in the right places, creating cumulative damage faster than the healing can adapt. It's not about hitting harder. It's about hitting smarter. Krell looked at the corpse, then at Marcus, then back at the corpse. This was a Varathian shock beast. They are considered unkillable by conventional means. We have entire military doctrines built around avoiding them rather than engaging them. There are insurance policies that specifically exclude damage caused by shock beast attacks because they are considered acts of unpreventable catastrophe. Yeah, well, Marcus finished his inspection, reassembled his weapon with practiced ease. Maybe don't tell your insurance companies I figured out how to kill them. Hate to ruin their business model. The ship's intercoms crackled to life. Captain Trell's voice, sounding like he'd aged several years in the last 15 minutes, echoed through the bay. "This is the captain. All hands, report status. Is the shock beast contained?" Krell walked to the nearest comm panel, still not entirely sure he believed what he'd witnessed. "Captain, this is Senior Guard Krell. The shock beast is deceased. The human killed it." A long pause. "Define deceased." "I mean it is dead, sir. Completely. Permanently. Not stunned or contained. Dead." Another pause, longer this time. "With what?" Krell looked at Marcus, who was now calmly eating something from a ration pack, like the last 15 minutes had been a minor inconvenience rather than a documented impossibility. "A ballistic rifle, sir. Approximately 40 rounds of chemically propelled ammunition." "That's not possible," Captain Trell said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Stand by. I'm coming down there." The comm clicked off. Krell looked at the corpse again, just to make sure it was still dead, and he hadn't hallucinated the entire event. Still dead. Getting deader by the second, in fact, as various biological processes began shutting down for good. "So," Marcus said around a mouthful of whatever passes for food in human military rations, "this battle cruiser that's coming. Think they'd still want to see this thing? Or should we just space it before it starts to smell worse?" "They will want to see it," Krell said quietly. "They will want to document everything. Examine the wounds. Understand how you did this." He paused, mandibles clicking in what his translator rendered as contemplation. "There will be questions, many questions, from many people." "Great. Love questions." Marcus didn't sound like he loved questions. He sounded like someone who was already planning how to avoid answering most of them. "Look, it's not complicated. You've got soft targets inside hard shells all over your galaxy, right? Things that evolved heavy armor because nothing on their homeworlds could get through it. But armor doesn't help if the thing inside the armor breaks first." Krell thought about the implications, thought about every species that relied on natural armor or advanced defensive technology, thought about military doctrines that assumed certain creatures were effectively invulnerable to small arms fire, thought about how many of those assumptions had just become very, very wrong. "You do understand," he said carefully. that this changes things significantly. Marcus shrugged again, that uniquely human gesture of studied indifference. Things change. That's what they do. Look, you guys have plasma weapons, shield generators, faster than light travel. We've got bullets. Sometimes bullets are enough. Sometimes they're better. Depends on the problem. Bullets, Krell repeated, testing the word. His translator had provided 17 different terms for human projectile weapons, ranging from primitive to surprisingly effective, and he was starting to think they'd all been wrong. You killed an unkillable creature with bullets. I killed a creature that people thought was unkillable because they were thinking about the wrong problems, Marcus corrected. Big difference. First one's impossible. Second one just takes practice and a basic understanding of biology. Captain Trell arrived 14 minutes later, accompanied by half the senior staff and someone who looked like they did paperwork for a living and were deeply unhappy about being summoned to a cargo bay that smelled like a slaughterhouse. They all stopped at the edge of the deck plating, staring at the corpse like it was personally offensive. "Ancestors preserve us," Trell whispered. "It's actually dead." Yep. Marcus had finished his ration and was now cleaning his rifle. Again. Apparently humans cleaned their weapons a lot. Krell was starting to understand why. The paperwork specialist, a Quellan named Voss, approached the corpse with the kind of caution usually reserved for armed explosives. He pulled out a scanning device, ran it over the shock beast's hide, then stared at the readout like it had just insulted his family. 27 entry wounds, Voss said, in a voice that suggested he was personally offended by the number. Minimal damage to the exterior hide. Most wounds show clean entry with massive internal trauma. The hydraulic system has collapsed completely. Regenerative tissue shows signs of systemic overload. He looked up at Marcus. "You did this with a ballistic weapon?" "Yeah." "Just bullets? No plasma enhancement? No explosive tips? No specialized ammunition?" "Standard military ball ammunition," Marcus confirmed. "Might have some Teflon coating for better penetration, but nothing fancy." Voss looked at his scanner, then at Marcus, then back at the scanner. "This is going to require so much paperwork. So much. You have no idea." "I really don't," Marcus agreed cheerfully. Captain Trell approached, his crest doing things that Krell had learned indicated deep thought mixed with mild panic. "Mr. Webb, I feel I should point out that this creature was valued at approximately 40 million credits. It was being transported to a research facility where they intended to study its regenerative capabilities for medical applications." "Was?" Marcus asked. "Yes, was. Because now it is extremely dead and worth significantly less." Trell sighed, a sound like wind through caves. "However, given that the alternative was it eating my entire crew and possibly breaching the hull, I suppose dead is preferable. The insurance adjusters will be thrilled." "Look on the bright side," Marcus suggested. "Now you can sell the corpse to the same research facility for study on how to kill them. That's got to be worth something." Trell considered this. "That's actually not a terrible idea. Voss, make a note. See if we can recoup some of the loss by marketing this as a training aid or research specimen." "Already noted, sir," Voss said, still scanning. "Though I should mention that the moment this becomes public knowledge, every military in 3 sectors is going to want to know exactly how this was done. We're talking about the potential obsolescence of several major defense doctrines." "Not obsolete," Marcus interjected. "Just incomplete. Your plasma weapons are still great for most things, just not for biological targets with heavy armor and regenerative capabilities. Different tools for different jobs." Krell listened to this conversation and felt something shift in his understanding of humans. He'd worked with them before, obviously. You couldn't operate a multi-species cargo vessel without running into humanity's peculiar brand of chaos. But he'd always thought of them as clever without being brilliant, strong without being dominant, adaptable without being revolutionary. The battlecruiser Infinite Justice arrived 3 hours and 42 minutes later, which was 18 minutes early, and suggested that Captain Trell's initial distress call had been significantly more panicked than Krell remembered. The massive vessel settled into formation alongside their comparatively tiny cargo hauler like a predator examining something it might eat later if it got hungry enough. Admiral Vex materialized in the transport bay via matter stream, because apparently the situation was important enough to warrant command-level attention and too urgent for shuttle protocols. She was Thraxian, all scales and calculated threat assessment, with the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer and remained comprehensively unimpressed. She looked at the shock beast corpse, then at Marcus, who was now sitting on a cargo container reading something on a datapad, then back at the corpse. Her crest flared twice, which, in Thraxian body language, translated roughly to, "Are you kidding me with this?" "Captain Trell," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who signed things that determined whether entire planets had good days or bad ones, "your emergency transmission indicated a containment breach, with multiple casualties and imminent vessel destruction. I brought enough firepower to sterilize this entire sector. Instead, I find one dead shock beast and a human reading what appears to be a novel." "Technical manual, actually," Marcus corrected without looking up. "Your plasma containment systems have some interesting design flaws. Thought I'd educate myself in case something else breaks." Admiral Vex's crest flared again, more emphatically this time. "You killed the shock beast." "Yep." "With bullets." "Yep." Varathian shock beasts are classified as Class 7 biological hazards, which is the same threat category we assign to spatial anomalies and uncontained antimatter. We don't fight them. We avoid them. We have 300 years of military doctrine supporting this position. Marcus finally looked up from his datapad. "Well, your military doctrine might need an update then. No offense." Krell watched Admiral Vex process this statement. He'd served under her command briefly, years ago, and knew she had two modes: controlled professionalism and controlled professionalism that was thinking about introducing you to an airlock from the wrong side. The silence stretched long enough that several crew members began edging toward exits. Then she laughed. Not a polite chuckle or social courtesy. A genuine bark of amusement that echoed through the bay like weapons fire. "You know what? Fair enough. Voss, I want a complete analysis. Every wound, every bullet trajectory, full ballistic reconstruction. If humans figured out how to kill shock beasts with primitive weapons, I want to know how before someone else does." "Already begun, Admiral," Voss said, surrounded now by scanning equipment that looked expensive enough to purchase a small moon. "Initial findings suggest Mr. Webb exploited the hydraulic nature of the creature's circulatory system. Multiple rapid impacts created cascading pressure failures that overwhelmed regenerative capabilities. It's actually quite elegant once you understand the principle." "Elegant," Admiral Vex repeated, tasting the word. "We've been running from these things for centuries, and the solution was elegant." She turned her full attention to Marcus, and Krell saw something he'd rarely witnessed in senior military officers: genuine curiosity. "How did you know it would work?" Marcus set down his datapad, which Krell noticed was definitely not a technical manual, but appeared to be some kind of human adventure story involving improbable physics and romantic subplots. "Didn't? Not for sure. But I've hunted big game back home. Earth's got plenty of things that'll kill you if you're not paying attention. You learn pretty quick that size and armor don't mean invincible. Just means you have to be smarter about placement." "Big game," Admiral Vex said. You're comparing a Varathian shock beast to Earth wildlife? Well, shock beasts bigger and meaner, Marcus admitted, and probably smarter. But the principles are the same. Find the weak points, overwhelm the system's ability to compensate, keep shooting until the threat stops being threatening. Plus, your shock beast was already stressed from the containment breach. Adrenaline, or whatever it uses, was probably spiking, heart rate elevated, blood pressure up. Made my job easier. Krell felt obligated to interject. The shock beast tore through reinforced hull plating like it was paper. It ignored direct plasma fire from military-grade weapons. It destroyed 3 armed security officers in under 10 seconds. This was not easy prey. Never said it was easy, Marcus replied. Said it was doable. Different thing entirely. Admiral Vex walked around the corpse, examining it from multiple angles. Her tactical implants were probably recording everything, analyzing wound patterns, building simulations. The Commerce Guild is going to lose their minds when they hear about this. Half their insurance models depend on shock beasts being effectively invulnerable to small arms fire. Already documented, Admiral, Voss called out. I have 17 different legal departments requesting immediate briefings. 23 weapons manufacturers want specifications. And somebody from the Xenobiology Institute is offering to trade their firstborn spawn for tissue. Samples. Tell the Institute they can have samples after we're done with them, Admiral Vex decided. Tell the weapons manufacturers maybe, after security review. Tell the lawyers absolutely not until I've had enough stimulants to deal with their nonsense. She looked at Marcus again. You realize you've just made yourself either very valuable or very problematic, possibly both? Marcus picked up his datapad again. Just killed a thing that needed killing. Didn't ask for it to become an incident. Well, it's an incident now, Admiral Vex said, though she didn't sound particularly upset about it. How many rounds did you use? 47. And how many do you have left? Marcus patted his remaining magazines. 120, give or take. Admiral Vex's crest did something complex that Krell's translator struggled with, but roughly meant interesting tactical consideration. Hypothetically, if we encountered another shock beast, could you replicate this result? Probably. Maybe easier now that I know it works. Marcus shrugged. Wouldn't want to make a habit of it, though. These things are fast and they hit like asteroids. Got lucky with the terrain here, having that pillar to work with. Open ground would be trickier. Define lucky, Admiral Vex said. Still alive lucky. That's pretty much the only definition that matters in my line of work. Captain Trell, who'd been quietly having what appeared to be a minor nervous breakdown in the corner, finally found his voice. Admiral, with respect, we need to discuss protocols. If humans can kill shock beasts with personal weapons, this has implications for trade security, transport regulations, military engagement doctrines. I'm aware, Captain. Believe me, I'm composing the briefing in my head right now, and it's giving me a migraine. Admiral Vex pulled out a comm unit. This is Admiral Vex to Fleet Intelligence. Priority Alpha Clearance. Begin compiling all data on human military capabilities, specifically small arms tactics against heavily armored biological targets. Cross-reference with hunting practices and historical combat records. I want a full assessment within 6 hours. A tinny voice acknowledged from the comm. Admiral Vex closed it, then turned back to Marcus. I'm going to need you to come aboard the Infinite Justice. We have proper debriefing facilities, and I want our tactics specialists to hear this directly from you. Do I have a choice? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Technically, yes. Practically, no. I'll make it worth your while. Full Alliance tactical consultant rates, hazard bonuses included. Plus, I'll personally ensure your cargo hauler contract gets flagged for priority status on all future runs. Consider it compensation for dealing with military bureaucracy. Marcus considered this. Cargo priority's nice, but I've got a schedule to keep. How long's this debriefing going to take? Depends on how cooperative you are, and how many times you have to explain basic concepts to people who should already understand them, Admiral Vex said. Realistically, probably 8 to 10 hours. We'll feed you, provide accommodations if needed, and transport you back when we're done. Fine, but I want that priority cargo status in writing, and hazard pay calculated from the moment that shock beast broke containment, not just when I started shooting. Admiral Vex's crest flared in what might have been approval or amusement. Negotiating with an admiral, that's bold. That's business, Marcus corrected. You want my expertise? I want fair compensation. Pretty standard arrangement. Done. Voss, draft the contracts. Standard tactical consultant rates plus 20% hazard modifier. Backdated to the containment breach timestamp. Admiral Vex looked at Krell. Senior Guard Krell, you're also coming. I want your perspective as a witness and someone with actual shock beast combat training. Krell's mandibles clicked in surprise. Admiral, I did not engage in combat. I observed from the airlock, which shows exceptional survival instinct and gives you an unobstructed view of the engagement. That's valuable. You're coming. It wasn't a request. Krell knew better than to argue with admirals who'd already made decisions. Yes, Admiral. The matter's stream transit to the Infinite Justice was brief, but disorienting, as it always was. One moment, Krell stood in the cargo bay, surrounded by the lingering smell of dead shock beast. The next, he materialized in a military debriefing room that smelled like recycled air, and the kind of cleaning products used to sterilize things that really needed sterilizing. The room was larger than necessary, which suggested Admiral Vex expected quite the audience. Multiple holographic displays lined the walls, currently showing tactical readouts and what appeared to be live feeds from various military channels. A conference table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs designed for multiple species physiology. Marcus appeared beside Krell a moment later, looked around the room, and immediately found the refreshment station. This is going to be one of those meetings where everyone asks the same questions in slightly different ways, isn't it? Almost certainly, Admiral Vex confirmed, materializing last. Welcome to military intelligence gathering. It's exactly as tedious as you're imagining. Krell, you'll sit there. Webb, you're here at the head of the table. Try not to fall asleep during the boring parts. No promises, Marcus said, but he took his seat and actually looked alert. Krell suspected the human had been through enough military debriefings to know when to pay attention. The next hour proved Admiral Vex's prediction accurate. Officers materialized via matter stream in groups, each representing different branches of Alliance military command. Tactics specialists, weapons analysts, xenobiology consultants, and several people whose titles were so classified that Krell's security clearance wasn't sufficient to know what they actually did. They all wanted to know the same things. How did you do it? Can it be replicated? What are the limitations? What other creatures might be vulnerable to this approach? The questions came in waves, each one probing deeper into tactical minutiae that made Krell's head hurt. Marcus answered them all with varying degrees of patience. Yes, it could be replicated with proper training. No, it wasn't a universal solution to all armored threats. Yes, ballistic weapons had limitations that energy weapons didn't. No, he wouldn't recommend humans start hunting shock beasts recreationally. Yes, he understood the implications for military doctrine. No, he didn't think it was revolutionary so much as practical application of basic biology. One particularly persistent tactics officer, a Kelvin named Drex, kept pushing for specifics. But you must have had some advanced targeting assistance. Neural implants, predictive combat algorithms, Something. The shot placement was too precise for unassisted organic targeting. "I've been shooting since I was 7, Marcus said, his patience audibly wearing thin. "That's 26 years of practice. I don't need implants to hit what I'm aiming at." 26 years, Drex repeated skeptically. "You're claiming pure muscle memory and experience?" "I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating facts. Humans start weapons training young. We've been using projectile weapons for thousands of years. We're good at it because we've had lots and lots of practice. But surely modern energy weapons render such primitive skills obsolete," another officer interjected. This one was Virillion, all tentacles and intellectual superiority. Marcus fixed him with a look that made several people shift uncomfortably. "Tell that to the shock beast." "Oh, wait. You can't, because it's dead, and I'm the one who killed it with my primitive skills and obsolete weapons." Admiral Vex's crest flared in what Krell was now certain was amusement. "Gentlemen, I believe we're getting off track. The human's methodology is documented. The results are verified. What we need to determine is implementation strategy, not whether we believe it works. It demonstrably does. Implementation across multiple species will be problematic," the Virillion officer persisted. "Not all of us have human reflexes or visual acuity." "Then adapt the principles to your capabilities," Marcus suggested. "This isn't about copying humans exactly. It's about understanding that armor and regeneration have limits, and exploiting those limits intelligently. Use whatever weapons you're comfortable with. Just think about cumulative damage, instead of single-shot stopping power." The debriefing continued for another 3 hours. Krell provided his observations, which mostly amounted to confirming that, yes, the shock beast was definitely trying to kill them all, and yes, Marcus really did kill it with just bullets. And no, he couldn't explain the mechanics better than Marcus already had, because his expertise was in security procedures, not biomechanical systems failure. Eventually, even Admiral Vex seemed satisfied. "All right, I think we've extracted everything useful. Webb, you're free to return to your ship. The contracts will be transmitted within the hour. Krell, you'll file a formal incident report, and then you're back on regular duty rotation." "Admiral," Krell said, because something had been bothering him, and he figured now was the time to ask. "What happens next? I mean, strategically. If humans can kill shock beasts, what does that change?" Admiral Vex leaned back in her chair, which creaked ominously under her weight. "Honestly? Probably less than you'd think. Shock beasts are rare. Most species never encounter them. This doesn't revolutionize warfare, it just adds a new data point to our tactical understanding. But it does raise interesting questions about humans and their approach to problems." "What kind of questions?" Marcus asked, suddenly paying closer attention. "The kind where we realize you've been operating at a technological disadvantage for decades and compensating with creativity we didn't fully appreciate," Admiral Vex said. "Your species doesn't have the most advanced weapons or the fastest ships or the best shields, but you have this annoying habit of looking at things everyone else considers impossible and just doing them anyway. It's simultaneously impressive and concerning." Marcus smiled that dangerous smile again. "Impossible just means nobody's figured out how yet. Give us time. We usually get there eventually." "That," Admiral Vex said, "is precisely what concerns me." They materialized back on the cargo hauler to find Captain Trell overseeing a cleanup crew that was carefully removing shock beast remains while wearing enough protective equipment to survive a nuclear detonation. The bay smelled significantly better now, which suggested industrial-grade deodorizers and possibly minor war crimes against olfactory senses. "All settled?" Captain Trell asked, looking significantly calmer than when Krell had last seen him. "As settled as it gets, when you accidentally prove centuries of military doctrine incomplete, Krell replied. We're clear to resume normal operations. The Admiral sends her regards and reminds you that all documentation is now classified at the highest security levels. Wonderful! More paperwork. Trell looked at Marcus. You know, when we hired you on for this run, your files said you were experienced with hostile environment security. It did not mention you were experienced with making the impossible look routine. Would you have believed it if it did? Marcus asked. Fair point. Trell's crest rippled in what might have been respect, or possibly resignation. Well, we're 3 days behind schedule now, but given that we're all still alive, I'm calling that acceptable. Plus, the research. Facility actually increased their offer for the Shock Beast Corps once they heard about the cause of death. Apparently, academic interest in human ballistic techniques just skyrocketed. Happy to help science, Marcus said dryly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to clean my rifle again and maybe sleep for 10 hours. Fighting evolutionary perfection is exhausting. Krell watched him leave, then turned to Captain Trell. Sir, permission to speak candidly? Granted. I think we severely underestimate humans. Trell's crest rippled again. You know, I'm starting to agree with you. They don't have our technology or our natural advantages, but they have this quality, this refusal to accept limitations that everyone else considers immutable. It's dangerous, potentially very dangerous. To whom? Krell asked. To anything that makes the mistake of thinking humans know their place in the galaxy, Trell said quietly. They don't. They're still figuring out what that place is, and I suspect they're going to redefine it in ways we haven't anticipated. The cleanup crew finished their work. The bay returned to normal operations. The ship resumed its journey through the void between stars, carrying cargo and crew, and one human who'd casually rewritten assumptions about what was possible. Krell filed his incident report that night, carefully documenting everything he'd witnessed. He included tactical observations, timeline reconstructions, and his professional assessment that Marcus Webb represented a concerning trend in human capability development that warranted further study. 3 days later, as they approached their destination, Krell's terminal pinged with a priority message. It was from Admiral Vex, flagged with security protocols that made his eyes water just looking at the encryption keys. The message was brief. Analysis complete. Preliminary findings suggest human ballistic tactics could be effectively applied against 17 other species currently classified as extreme combat threats. Recommendations forwarded to Alliance Military Command. Secondary analysis indicates humans have been systematically solving problems we've considered unsolvable for decades, usually without telling anyone. Further investigation ongoing. Good work spotting this. Promotion paperwork attached. Krell stared at the message for a long time. Then he pulled up the attached files and started reading. 3 hours later, he'd only scratched the surface of what humans had been quietly accomplishing, while everyone else assumed they were just the new species still learning the ropes. They weren't learning the ropes. They were rewriting the manual, one impossible solution at a time. Somewhere in the crew quarters, Marcus Webb was probably asleep, dreaming whatever humans dreamed about. Probably nothing profound. Probably just normal things like food and rest, and maybe wondering what he'd shoot next. Krell decided he was very glad humans were allies, because if they ever decided to become enemies, the galaxy would have significant problems. The kind that couldn't be solved by throwing bigger weapons at them, the kind that required you to think differently about what was possible. And Krell was beginning to suspect that was humanity's actual superpower, making everyone else realize the rules weren't as fixed as they'd believed. The cargo hauler continued through the void, its crew unaware that they'd just witnessed the beginning of a tactical revolution. Somewhere in Alliance Military Command, strategists were recalculating threat assessments and updating doctrine manuals. Somewhere in research facilities, scientists were dissecting shock beast tissue and marveling at the precision of human ballistic techniques. And somewhere in the quiet moments between stars, one human slept peacefully, his rifle cleaned and ready beside him, completely unconcerned that he'd just changed everything. Because, from his perspective, he'd just done his job. Shoot the thing that needed shooting. Don't get killed in the process. Collect payment. Move on to the next job. Simple, practical, human. The galaxy was still learning what that really meant.